Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have asked if there were any limits to his global powers. Mr. Trump said, "Yeah, there is one thing: my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me." While wiping his ass with the Constitution from NewYorkTimes.com, posted by Fear the Creeper. And then they added, okay, made that last bit up. It was actually just the Bill of Rights Trump wiped his ass with. That Trump quote is real BTW. And yeah, personally, no. I personally don't think Trump should have. I personally think he should have limits when it comes to his global powers. But ultimately, power is whoever in charge says it is when it comes to, and that's very much true when it comes to government. When the government's ultimately, they never really ever care for the Constitution. But the Reddit only seems to care that Trump doesn't care for it. Obama didn't care for it either when he constantly drone striked and bombed the Middle East. Or Biden didn't care for it either when it came to all the COVID authoritarianism. But Orange Man, they only seem to care that Orange Man doesn't care for the Constitution. And yeah, ultimately, the government's going to be whatever those in power say it is. And they might say, "Oh, we have to follow all the Constitution and Bill of Rights," but the government can conveniently find a way around it whenever it feels like it, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. It's very much how the people will say their laws are objective, but in reality, laws are much more subjective than objective. It's very much what are those in positions of power willing to justify when it comes to any branch of government, be it the courts or the police or the military or the elected officials. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have DOJ withholding those documents posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Thomas Massey subreddit. And that looks like a video from Thomas Massey's YouTube channel. And it says Rep Massey on CNN to take the lead with Jake Tapper. DOJ is withholding those documents. And yeah, personally, as I said, ultimately, I don't think the DOJ should be withholding any documents that needs to release. But ultimately, as I stated in the last post, those in positions of power can justify doing whatever they want to. Ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it if you don't like it. They're the ones who have the legal monopolies of force, and if they don't, and if you want to break in and take those documents, you should be able to, but they have the force to stop you, and ultimately, if they don't want to release them, that they can't be forced to do so since they're the ones who they're in their possession currently. Next we have There Is Hope, But We Must Build It. Cooperation Tulsa 2025 Year in Review. And that's a YouTube video posted by Narco Federation. That's a YouTube video from Anarch, and it's reproductive security, food freedom, popular power, Cooperation Tulsa 2025. And they added, Cooperation Tulsa is building a revolutionary movement for organizing our community, not seizing state power. Let's talk about the year of 2025 in review. And yeah, personally, I think that sounds good, I think as long as it's voluntary collectivism rather than forced collectivism, and no one who is forced to join in if they don't want to, I think that's very libertarian. I might disagree with some of the stances of this group, but as long as, they keep it amongst themselves and don't force anyone to join, I think it's very much should be libertarian approved, as long as it's voluntary collectivism rather than forced collectivism. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Know the Difference, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross post from the Fuck the Alt-Right subreddit, and it's a meme. No, ICE is not like the Gestapo, and it's a checklist. And they both have check marks under private army serving one man, purposes to facilitate ethnic cleansing, dress in intimidating clothing, send out terrorize neighborhoods, currently kidnap innocent people, all of them do not carry search warrants, do not allow their victims a fair trial, send their victims to concentration camps, and then there's a check next to ICE for this one, but next to the Gestapo, hide their faces behind masks, and the next one, it's the public is afraid to fight back, Gestapo check, ICE X. And personally, if you want to call ICE the Gestapo, I think that's fine. But I would say pretty much any government law enforcement agency is the Gestapo, especially since they have the legal monopolies of force. It's very much how Reddit's being a circle jerk. Reddit's always going to be a progressive circle jerk. They'll just say whatever the progressive narrative is. Like how yesterday, or I think it was a few days ago, they shared a picture of an ICE officer pointing a gun at the man, even though the the ICE officer pointing the gun at was arguably the one who started the tension. Reddit's obviously going to share things to they'll always go with the general DNC narrative. And, it's very much, if Reddit wants to call everything fascism, I think it should be able to. But, Reddit will become pro-fascism the second, the blue party takes back the reins of the state. So, they're not really, they don't really, all they want is a dictator they agree with. They really don't care about freedom of all. It's like, a guy down the street from me has a sign that says fascism is here. If you sit out, it wins. And it's very much like, we might as well have a sign that says Redditor lives here. Because, when you call everything you don't like fascism or Gestapo, eventually, people are going to start toning you out, and that's very much Reddit for you at this point. It's always going to, when you're so biased to whatever the official narrative is, people aren't gonna stop listening. It's very much like Chicken Little or The Boy Who Cried Wolf. When you constantly go, the sky is falling or the wolf is attacking, eventually, people aren't gonna care anymore. It's very much, that's where it is at this point. It's very much constant circle jerking of Orange Man bad, DNC less bad or good, and eventually you get tired of it. And that's my thoughts there. Next we have Trump. We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. In parentheses, Putin laughing his ass off from CNBC.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, Greenland seems to be one of Trump's autistic hyperfixations. But ultimately, I don't know if anything's going to come of it. He's been on Greenland on and off since like 2019 now. Nothing's come of it yet. But I guess we'll have to wait and see on that front. You never know what's going to come of what Trump says. What's going to be social media circle jerking, and what's actually going to happen. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Libertarian Jesse telling it like it is, posted by FastyRubenus739, and that's cross-post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And that looks like a video of Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota, talking about the ICE shooting that happened there recently. And yeah, personally, I respect Jesse Ventura. I don't agree with him on everything, but he's definitely one of the more libertarian-esque officials who've held public office. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have ICE social media references white nationalist anthem and recruiting post from Twitter.com, posted by LegioX, and that's linked to a tweet from Andrew Bates, who tweeted, "The violent incel support group known as ICE is quoting a KKK theme song in between taking freedom from lives away." And it's quote tweeting Homeland Security, who tweeted, "We'll have her home again, join ICE.gov." And then the picture he shared was "By God, We'll Have Her Home Again." "By God, We'll Have Her Home Again" is a white nationalist song sung to the tune of "Rolling Down to Old Maui," a 19th century sea shanty. Its lyrics are more often credited to be a U.S. fraternal neo-Nazi group. It was adopted as the official theme song of a Canadian Diagolon movement. And yeah, personally, if you want to think that's a dog whistle, ultimately, that's another word that Reddit constantly uses is dog whistle. They're always like, "Oh, that's a white nationalist dog whistle." And when you constantly are listening for dog whistles everywhere, you're gonna hear them. If you want to think something's a dog whistle, that's fine. But ultimately, when everything's a dog whistle, nothing is, and that's very much how Reddit works. It's like they'll say, "Oh, this is fascism. This is Nazism. This is authoritarianism." And when we constantly use those words, eventually people are just going to start numbing you out, as I noted earlier. Next, we have Jonathan Ross had a Gadsden flag flying outside his home. Put in parentheses, "fascist murder satire first," posted by CH4Locks. Then as a cross post from the Age Like Milk subreddit, and it looks like a guy who tweeted, "There is a hilarious and disgusting irony that Jonathan Ross had a fucking Gadsden flag flying outside his house." I think he was the guy, the ICE officer who shot Renee Nicole Good or whatever. And yeah, personally, I think it's interesting. Reddit says, "Oh, well, we're against doxing," yet they doxed the ICE agent who shot the Renee Nicole Good, and it just goes to show you that they have no consistent principles other than in-group good, out-group bad. And yeah, personally, I don't think, well, what Ross, I think he kind of escalated tensions more than he should have. But ultimately, I'm sure if he was in-group coded rather than out-group coded, Reddit would think he's the greatest guy ever. But of course, Reddit doesn't care about any situation other than in-group bad, out-group good, or in-group good, out-group bad. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Theo Von and Dave Smith gave huge praise to Nick Fuentes, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's crossed from the Theo Von subreddit. And yeah, personally, Nick Fuentes, I might not agree with him on anything, and he can be kind of an autistic 4chan edgelord, and he's kind of being normified over the past couple of weeks, I would say, But, I definitely do think, he's probably one of the better voices out there these days. Of course, Reddit would say, oh, that's Nazism, but, Reddit calls anyone who dissents at all Nazi anyway, so, ultimately, if Nick Fuentes wants to embrace the label, I don't see why not at this point. And yeah, ultimately, if you want to like what he says, that's fine. If you want to platform him, that's fine. Justify platforming and saying whatever you want to. Reddit wants anyone who dissents at all censored. And as I said earlier, I don't agree with Nick Fuentes on everything. But, ultimately, he should be able to say what he wants to say. If you want to support him for that, I think that's fine. Support whoever you want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. will take Greenland the hard way if they can't do it the easy way, Trump says, from CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, we're going to do something in Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor, Trump told reporters at the White House. There are other ways to defend Greenland from Russia and China. It's almost as if he's lying about his motivations. And yeah, that's politicians for you. They love to lie, and, I personally don't really care for it, but, if Trump was angry, if it was Biden saying we got to invade Greenland, Reddit would say it's the greatest idea ever. But since it's the orange man, Reddit doesn't like it, and it's very much how Reddit thinks: it's in group good, out group bad. They'll call you a bootlicker if you defend the ICE agent. And I personally don't defend the ICE agent. I think if he was a civilian, maybe the shooting would have been more justified. Maybe, but Reddit always licks the boot when it's there, when it's the in-group code rather than the out-group code, and I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Trump says he will temporarily cap credit card rates, posted from Politico.com, posted by socialist or morons, and they added, fuck this an economically illiterate president. And yeah, I personally would agree with that. I don't think the president should be telling what credit card rates can and can't be, and that should be the subject of what the credit card companies are willing to have them at. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have an ICE agent in Minnesota showing their current mentality, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit, and looks like that's since been removed. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for ICE, just like I don't really care for any other government law enforcement agency. In my ideal world, we would have a private militia enforce immigration laws, just like all the other laws. Because if it's private, they at very least won't have the legal monopoly to force. So that'll be more justified, I would say, than having the public law enforcement. I would say we should have private law enforcement, regardless. I'm sure if if the ICE was a more in-group coded agency rather than an out-group coded agency, Reddit would justify everything it does, and that just very much goes to show you, like with a lot of people, people are always going to justify whatever the in-group does, and meaning what the out-group does. If the roles were reversed, and Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever, but Reddit, just like a lot of other people, like a lot of people on X and other social media, they're always going to justify seeing and saying whatever supports their side rather than trying to be truly objective. Next, we have EU troops might be needed to stop a U.S. showdown in Greenland, from Euronews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. Looks like he's kind of got Trump's autistic hyperfixation on Greenland rubbed off on him. If cooperation or Greenlandic independence fails, a preventative EU troop deployment could avert U.S. conversation on the island, German Green MEP Sergei Loganinsky argues. And yeah, personally, if the EU wants to defend Greenland, I think that's fine. I personally think Greenland is just mostly political theater at this point to distract from other stuff. Trump actually did kidnap the president of Venezuela, but people have already seemed to move on to Greenland in regards to international affairs, and that's very much why I think it's just kind of bait from him to distract from what he actually does. That's very much what Trump does. He always tries to bait Redditors with shit that really doesn't matter, and they take the bait every time. It's like, oh my god, he's adding his name to the side of the Kennedy Center. He's literally Hitler. Oh, look at all these plaques he's adding to the White House. He's literally Hitler. And it's shit that ultimately doesn't really matter. But Reddit always takes the bait every single time. Next, we have Georgism as a Service, set up your own land value auction, posted by Baton 13, and that's an article from boingboing.net. This tool lets communities auction shared resources and split the proceeds. And yeah, I think that sounds good. I think if communities want to auction off shared resources and everyone's voluntarily agreement about it rather than forced agreement, I think that was a good idea. I would say personally, as long as no one's forced to do anything they don't want to. Next, we have Nicaraguan authorities arrest dozens for supporting Maduro catcher from TheGuardian.com, posted by socialists are morons. And yeah, personally, I don't think the authorities should be arresting people for just supporting something. But ultimately, the authorities of any government can justify doing whatever they feel like within their borders, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it since they have the legal monopoly on the use of force. Next, we have Bill and Hillary Clinton face contempt of Congress for dodging on Epstein's subpoenas again, from AOL.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's crossed from the Epstein subreddit. And yeah, personally, it's very rare that you see Reddit go after the Bill and Hillary rather than the Orange Man. But you do see it occasionally, I guess, because they needed to at least try and look kind of objective sometimes, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting when you look at the comments. Reddit's all just constantly defending them, and it just goes to show you that if the Orange Man was in group rather than out group, Reddit would be constantly defending him as well. Even though as George Carlin famously said, it's a big club and you ain't in it, and Bill and Hillary are in that just like the big club, just like the Orange Man is. Next, we have Trump's all control the many Venezuela oil claim from Cato.org, posted by Phil Not Phil, and I personally don't think Trump should be in control of the money, but just like I don't think the government should be in control of any money, I personally think each individual should be in control of any money, and that's why I personally don't really care for the current monetary system of a centralized Federal Reserve, a centralized bank currency. We have the central bank being the Federal Reserve. I think the libertarian position is everyone should have their own currency, and I personally think bartering would probably be the strongest. Back before we even had money, I think that would be the strongest libertarian thing, because ultimately, each person has whatever resources they have, and if they want to trade those resources, I think that's fine. But I think having a centralized economic system, while it sounds good on paper, definitely leads to the government having too much control over economic affairs. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have read what this judge has to say. Page 6, selection credibility from BrightSpotCDN.com, posted by Fear the Creeper, and they added, for example, defendants directed the court to 2 videos of agents outside the Broadview facility the evening of September 19, 2025. In those videos, agents stand behind a fence preparing to leave the facility's gates and disperse what defendants described as an unruly mob. The scene appears quiet as the gate opens, revealing live protesters standing in the street holding signs. Almost immediately, without warning, agents lob flashbang grenades, tear gas, and pepper balls at the protesters, saying "fuck yeah" as they do so. As the crowd scatters, this video proves defendants' contentions that protesters were the ones shooting off fireworks, refusing orders, and acting violently so as to justify the agent's use of force. And yeah, ultimately, people are always going to justify seeing what they want to see. I'm sure I'm sure the judge might be biased as well. Maybe the video could be edited. You have AI now, but people are ultimately going to come to whatever conclusions they want to. I'm sure if the mob outside was more of a MAGA mob, and the government agents were seen as more like the January 6th Capitol officers, Reddit would be all over them saying you have to believe what the cops say here. But ultimately, people are just going to justify seeing what they want to see, as we see with the Renee Nicole Good, and how everyone on the lot of right wing people think she was think the ICE agent was entirely justified. A lot of left wing people think the ICE agent was entirely unjustified, because ultimately people are going to let their own biases dictate how they view the world. Next, we have, this was a great write-up about the current ICE home invasions and illegality, posted by Patom13. That's cross from the Bad Cop No Donut subreddit. And yeah, personally, it looks like that's a pretty gulf text. I'm not going to read it. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what the legal perspective is when it comes to what Supreme Court cases they're citing or whatever. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what's in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or any Supreme Court decision. It matters what the government's willing to enforce in any given second. And oftentimes, since government agents are backed by the state, you oftentimes can't even hold them accountable, since they control the courts and legal system. The state controls the courts and legal system as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And then I wanted to do 2 posts I shared to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said, how hard is it running for public office as a member of the Libertarian Party? And I said, speaking from personal experience, it's very hard to even make the ballot, but I guess it does really depend on where you are running for. In 2022, I tried running for a seat in the State House of Representatives and needed to get 300 signatures, which I did, but ended up getting sued off the ballot by GOP operatives. I went to school with the daughter of one of them. She was my crush back in grade school. In 2024, I got nominated for the National House of Representatives, required to have signatures to make the ballot, and though the area to get signatures was larger than for the State House, I decided that was too much to realistically get, especially since GOP operatives just might sue me off the ballot again. Also, it's not elected office. In 2022, I interviewed for a seat on my township zoning board. They never got back to me. I'm just hoping to make it out for something before I croak TBH faults. And yeah, ultimately it's hard running as a third party rather than a major party. But ultimately, that you can either stick to your principles or sell out. And I'm the kind of guy who likes to stick to his principles. I think selling out might be easier, but you don't just do things because they're easy. You do them because you believe in what you're standing for, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then I also added, how can the Libertarian Party get more media coverage? And I said, my best idea for the party to run figures of who themselves tend to get lots of media coverage. I mean, stuff like how in the 2001 New York City mayoral election, the party ran the guy who Kramer and Seinfeld was based on, or on the 2012 Indiana gubernatorial election, the party ran Rupert Bonham of Survivor fame, or how some of the most coverage the party got in the 2024 post-election cycle was when Joe Exotic of Tiger King fame was seeking the party's nomination. Another tactic is to try and create as much engagement as possible. I personally don't care for a lot of their edgy tweets, but LPNH has shown it's definitely a way to get noticed, especially if you believe the old adage that there is no such thing as bad publicity. And yeah, ultimately, I like what this guy commented. White Squares, he said, I have to be the bearer of bad news, but the LP is basically blacklisted by all of mainstream media, and as much as no one likes to admit it, mainstream media continues driving all the narratives and political discourse. And I said in response, let's see, looks like it didn't take, but I'll try to get it. Try it again later. But I said agreed. But the good thing is that they are increasingly less mainstream than ever. It's why I now call them legacy media instead of mainstream media. I think that's probably why society is so divided these days, because now there's pretty infinite media sources compared to like how you used to only have a few newspapers and television channels. But ultimately, people are going to justify whatever they want to, and I definitely do think the decline of the mainstream media into the legacy media is something that's going to benefit third-party voices and independent voices in the future. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.